Zat Hashem, today we're holding on Amud Bet, Tanya Kavatei Da Abaye. Tanya Kavatei Da Abaye. We're going to have 3 sections today. Zat Hashem. Hopefully it's coming. 3 sections in the learning. The first, we're going to finish up the sugya we began yesterday, which was a machloket Abaye v'Rav Yosef
about the kupach.
Samuch leTano. Are you allowed to put food next to the tano? We said on top of it or inside of it you're not allowed because of the heat associated with it. But samuch was a question. We'll see. Proof to Abaye. And then the Gemara, we'll speak about what's kupach exactly. We'll see the mitziut of what it is. Then we're going to start a Mishnah. This is a very interesting Mishnah. The idea of this Mishnah is going to be using toldot ha'or and toldot chama. So what does it mean?
Shemesh.
You're heating food on Shabbat. We'll see setting it up before Shabbat, not on the fire with stovetop, but you're using something that was heated up by the sun or by the stove. We'll get into these different areas of halacha. Is it gezerah? Is it asuda doraita? Figure all that out. And then the last section we'll deal with particularly is a focus on this issue of enveloping or putting something inside of something that's toldot chama, and as it relates to, we'll see it's a machloket between Rabba and Rav Yosef. Let me just get it. It's very interesting. Chamei Tiveria, we're going to get to. It's very interesting stuff in terms of the melachot and Shabbat.
כמו לוחות, מה, איך תלמד בלי לוח?
Yalla, open up. Let's Lamed Amud Bet, Tanya Kavatei Da Abaye. Okay, so we had a machloket yesterday between Abaye and Rav Yosef. What was the machloket? Let's remember. The machloket between them, remember we have 3 types of ovens. We have kira or kirayim, tanor, kupach. Toda. So we said like this. Kirayim is the least heated. Tanor is the most. Kupach is something in the middle.
It depends.
Now,
it can be like that or it can be like that.
Right. So it's not something in the middle. Remind me, I have the paper for you after. I'll give it to you.
I'm sorry.
Just remind me.
Politics last night?
Yeah. She spoke with your wife.
Ah, yes?
Just remind me after.
Okay.
So we had a machloket like this. When it comes to tanur, we said gufa uktuma doesn't help you. It doesn't do anything.
Hot.
It's too hot.
It's too hot.
So he said, so on top of it or inside of it, it's asur to put food. The question was samuch. So Abaye said samuch is asur, and Rav Yosef said samuch is mutar. That's we had a machloket between Abaye and Rav Yosef yesterday. So we're holding here Tanya Kavatei Da Abaye, which is the second wide line on the page. Second wide line. Tanya, the last word on the line. Tanya. See?
Okay.
Tanya Kavatei Da Abaye. So we're going to bring a braita that supports Abaye. Let's see. The braita says like this. Tanor she'sikua bekash uvigvava. If you have a tanor that was heated up, even though it was just kash uvigvava, meaning even though it was the things that generally don't make it so hot or don't make coals. En somchin lo. So it says very clearly, en somchin lo. Tanor, even though it was heated up with the lesser materials, you can't put food next to it. Certainly you can't put on top of it. Certainly you can't put food inside of it. And for sure, if it's heated up with gefet and eitzim, you're not allowed to put. It's pashut, it's obvious. So this is already proof taba. You see, en somchin lo, not like Rav Yosef. Continues the braita. Kupach she'siku bekashu v'gvava. Now when it comes to a kupach, this was like Abaye learned in the Mishnah, which is the middle ground oven. Which is, remember, it was one, like a square oven with one place for a pot. Again, if it was heated up with a straw and stubble, somchinlo, you could put food next to it. Now the Graz Gear says, take out the word en. Vinot nin al gabav, and you could put food on top of it. Again, because when it's heated up with that, we said it's like a kirayim, and therefore if there's gufa ktuma, it's mutar. Begefet uve'itzim. Now regarding gefet and eitzim, ein somchin lo, we said if it's heated up with that, it's like a tanur, and you can't put food, so ein somchin lo, even next to it. So this was exactly like Abaye explained. Beautiful. Now the Gemara just wants to finish off and explain to us what exactly is this kupach. We already saw pictures, but what exactly is this kupach? So, exactly, it's something in the middle. How does how does the heat on this kupach work? How is the intensity? If you say it's like a kira, so it's a lower level heat, so then it should even be permitted if you have gufag tuma with gefet and itzim, it should be mutar. But if it's like a tano, like the higher heat, so then you shouldn't even be allowed to put food on it, whether it's chazara, sheya, again, with kashu v'gvava. So which one is it? So Amarle, so Rashi said back, Nafish havle midekira, its heat is stronger than the kira, v'zutar havale midetano, but its heat is less than the tanor, so it's somewhere in the middle. That's why we make that chiluk.
There is also maybe like differences, I think, with kupach, לתוכו על גבו, או לסמוך לידו, no? If it's basically חצי קירה, חצי תנור. So maybe there is also different, maybe על גבו, or לסמוך לו, או לתוכו אסור.
So the smoch is a machloket, that's what we got into, Abai Rav Yosef, exactly.
But maybe לסמוך, since it's not so hot compared to tanur, and it's also in between kira letanur, maybe there is kula.
So that's what Rav Yosef would say. Abai doesn't hold like that though. Eichidami kupach, says the Gemara. Now what is the build of a kupach? Eichidami kira, and what is the build of a kira? Sam Yosi bar Chachamim. Kupach, when it comes to the kupach, makom shvitat kedera achat. There's a place for one pot to go. The kupach, it's a square. Kira makom shvitat shtei kderot. And when it comes to the kira, you have a place for two pots. Means it's a double stove. There's two stoves. You put pots on two places. Amar Abai v'item Rabbi Yirmiyah afan anami tanino. We learned in the Mishnah Mesechet Kelim that highlights this same point. That the kupach has one place for a pot. The kirayim has for two places. Why? Because we know that the halacha is when it comes to kabbalat tumah, we've mentioned this many times, to be mekabel tumah, the vessel has to be usable. It has to be functional. If it loses its function, it's not usable, it's not mekabel tumah anymore. We spoke about this. No? Right?
No.
So for example, if you have a bowl and it makes there's a big hole in the bowl, it's not mekabel tumah anymore.
No, it's not clear.
It's not a kli, it loses its function. So the Mishnah Kelim says exactly this point. It says like this. Kira shenechleka le'oka. If you have a kira that's split along its length. Now again, what's a kira? Kira is a double stove. Along its length means not that it's split in half, but it's split lengthwise. You understand? Meaning the kira, if this is the bird's eye view. So along its length would mean here you have one place for a pot, another place for a pot. It means that it's split in the middle. Now this is not usable for anything anymore because exactly it broke it in half. That's the point. Along its length, that's not usable anymore. So therefore, in such a case, the Mishnah Kelim tells us teora. Now it's not mekabel tuma, it's taho because it broke. Exactly. L'rochba, however, if it broke in its width, so then tmeya. Why is it tmeya in that case? Because now it's not a kira, but what is it? It's two kupach. And that's what you have basically. And that's a kli still. So that's mekabel tum'ah.
So as long as the standard is kli, it's still mekabel tum'ah.
Exactly.
Once you lose the...
But how you can break the kira to two?
What's
like
that?
To split in the
you
can't.
Length. That's the point. It's broken now. That's broken. You're right. It's not functional anymore. And kupach, let's finish the Mishnah.
But how I can use it?
Just one second, let's finish the Mishnah. Kupach, ben oko, ben achbo. Now when it comes to the kupach, whether it breaks in length or the width, taho. Why is it taho? Because the kupach, again, bird's eye view, it only has a place for one pot. So whether it was broken like this or broken like this, it's not usable anymore. Memela, it's not mekabel tum'ah. So says Abai, you see from this Mishnah that the kira has a place for two pots and the kupach only place for one pot. That's the raya. That's exactly what we're talking about. Because he says, the kira, the Mishnah Kelim says, if you break it in lengthwise, it's not mekabel tum'ah. If you break it along the width, it is mekabel tum'ah. Why is it mekabel tum'ah? Because it's like two different kupach now. Beautiful. So that's a proof. Kira is two pots, a place of two pots. As opposed to the kupach itself, it's only a place of one pot. How do I know that? Because the Mishnah there says, whether it breaks along the width or the length, regardless, it's not usable anymore. It loses its function, it's ishtamshut, and therefore, it's not mekabel tumah.
But I don't understand, why did the whole explanation, if I know already it's this for two and this for one?
We're just bringing a proof from there, that's what it is. That's what we're bringing a proof. We're bringing a proof from that Mishnah that Kirayim holds two pots and Kupach holds one pot.
But I know that.
How do you know?
I see
because the Gemara told us. Okay, so how does the Gemara know? Because the Mishnah tells us. Zero? Yep. No? Question?
understand the kira, the kupach, like, you know, so you want to tell me that kupach is not receiving tuma, so
If you break it.
how I can apply the kupach for חזרה, שהייה, סמוך לו, על גבו, לתוכו.
The point is, we're just showing what it is. To show what is the Metziut, that's it. Exactly.
רגע. How I make the comparison, the השוואה, between קירה או תנור to a kupach.
What's the problem?
מה קשור עכשיו טומאה
We're just bringing a proof that kira has 2 pots. Kupach has place for 1 pot. That's it. Nothing to do with sheyah, chazara. We weren't talking about Shabbat, that we're talking about Kabbalat Tuma, but it's a proof that that's how it
they
looks.
spoke about shne kurim, shalosh kurim. There's no relation.
Well, there is a relation just to show us what it is.
What was the
what is it?
the machloket between
exactly. What is this item?
Show us what is this item. Just to prove that kira it's 2 place for 2 pot, and the kupach is רק לאחד.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just a proof.
Now, we're going to go now on to the new topic here, and this is a very interesting topic. There are a couple of details here.
So what's
the
story
to know.
Done with that?
Finito.
Moving on. Wrap it.
מותר לסמוך, אסור.
Wrap it before you move to the next one. Wrap the whole.
The bottom line is we have 3 types of ovens.
Yes.
We're saying when it comes to kira, since the flame is the lowest, it's the easiest thing to be metaken in order to do shihiyah or chazara. Meaning gufa ktuma is the most allowable. When it comes to tanur, it's the least allowable. It means it's so hot that it's kimat impossible to do chazara or sheyah. The only thing is, maybe samuchlo, it's a machloket amoraim. Fine. Kupach is something in the middle. Kupach is something in the middle. So its heat is stronger, but not as strong as a tanur. It depends what it is, and that's what we finished off. Now, we're moving on now to discuss like this. We have...
בלבולים כל הסוגיה הזאת.
ברוך השם, it's why we do chazara. Listen, we have to finish the Amud, that's fine. So look, we have like this. No, it should be Baruch Hashem. What is bishul? Bishul on Shabbat. What is this idea of bishul or afiyah actually? What is the idea of bishul or afiyah?
Using heat, you change the condition of the...
Beautiful. You improve food through heat. That's what you're doing. Now, improving food could be done in different ways. You could have bishul, which is hot water. You could have afiyah, which is baking in an oven, roasting. You could have different ways of doing it. But those would, they would all be included in the Isur D'Oraita. And what we're going to discuss here is very interesting. What about sun? So it's not the fire, but it's chama. And B, we're going to discuss also, what if it's toldot ha'or or toldot ha'chama? It's also we're going to discuss here.
You're taking a glass and you're using the...
This isn't the normal case that was done in the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, they boiled things up, the samamanim, whatever it was, the dyes or the spices, whatever it was, with fire. Now you're using heat from the sun. That's a different thing. So we're going to see over here, this introduces a new discussion. Is that asur as well? We're going to see, is it asur d'oraita? Is it asur d'rabanan? This is going to be different levels. But let's see, we're going to have a series of halachot.
For sure there is an option, there's a problem here, as I'm assuming that mechzikim bashel.
So let's see, exactly. It's going to be gzera maybe, but let's see. Says the Mishnah, Ein notnin beitza beitzara mecham bishvil shetitgalgel. You're not allowed to put an egg on the side of a kettle in order that it should titgalgel. Titgalgel means that it should roll. Okay. But Rashi explains, an unroasted egg, an uncooked egg, it doesn't roll. It's interesting. A roasted egg, science, it rolls. So what it means to say over here, this is how Rashi learns, is that you're not allowed to put...
Power of gravity.
Well, more than that. You're not allowed to put an egg next to a hot kettle on Shabbat that will partially roast it. Means it's not even going to fully roast it, but just to partially roast it, it's going to be asur.
Which is mean with it partially roasted, that Mishiki can start to be...
Because then it's able to be rolling.
Beautiful.
That's a Rashi learns, titgalgel. It's like a way of referring to partially roasting.
Again.
When an egg is not roasted, it's not cooked, it doesn't roll.
Okay.
Interesting thing.
Heavy.
I guess it gets heavier when it's cooked. I guess that's the pshat. But the point is, shetitgalgel, it means even to partially roast it, because when it partially roast, then it becomes able to roll. So that means you can't put it near, you're not talking about putting it on the fire, you're talking about putting it in boiling water, which is not even necessarily on the fire. And that's asur, even if it partially roasts it. We'll see in the Gemara, this is actually an asur d'oraita, because even partially roasted is fit for eating already. So that would even be the asur d'oraita. Let's see. V'lo yafki'ena b'sudarin, you're not allowed to crack an egg on sudarin. Now Rashi learns, what does it mean? You put handkerchiefs, you put scarves, like material in the sun. Those scarves get heated up by the sun, and then you want to crack an egg on those scarves, and it cooks. You could try it. On a hot day, you could do this in the sidewalk. It could work. So you heat up the scarves, right? The material essentially, in the sun, crack an egg on it. Says the Tanakama, you're not allowed to do that either. V'lo yafki'ena b'sudarin, you can't crack open an egg on a hot scarf. Again, the scarf was heated by the sun. So Rashi explains it, we'll see in the Gemara. And then cook an egg on it. For R Yose matir. Now, R Yose says it's mutar. Now let's just use the words the Gemara is going to use so we understand it. What is that called?
R Yose גם מתיר להם הביצים המצטמקות.
One second. What is that called?
מה?
The sun
toldot chama.
Heat up the scarf, which means the scarf is toldot chama. Tanakama says asur. R Yose says mutar. By the way, it says matir. It doesn't say patur. Matir means it's the gamri mutar. Okay, you understand? The gamri mutar. Okay, let's just put this down so far. So we have. I'm gonna put down the halachot so we keep track of everything. The first halacha we have is you can't put beitza.
Shabbat.
K'dei she'yitgalgel. Galgel, we'll see in the Gemara exactly what that means. Fine. That's halacha number 1.
Partially tzluya.
We have a machloket. What is the machloket?
ולא יפקיענה
בסודרין.
לא לעשות חביתה בשבת.
סודרין, that were chamu because of chama.
אצלכם זה לא תקף, אתם לא אוכלים חביתות.
רבי יוסי מתיר.
Machloket, Rabbi Yose is matir. And the Tanakama says, what's that?
Katoshka.
Let's continue. Says the Mishnah, "V'lo yatminena bechol uve'avak dachim b'shvil shetitzaleh." You're not allowed to bury an egg in the sand or in the dirt on the street in order that it should roast. Okay, now here there's no machloket.
Because the sand is gonna.
So let's see. Far kidei hatmana shetitzaleh. It gets very hot. People do this with meats also. They actually do such a funny thing. But anyways, now it's important to note, what is the isur? What is the heat source in that case? Hashemesh. And here Rabbi Yose doesn't argue. Okay, so we have to figure out why does he only argue in this case of the sudarin, he doesn't argue in this case of the chol. We'll see in the Gemara. Let's see. Maaseh, then the Mishnah continues. Maaseh shasu anshe Tiveria. There was a story that the people of Tiveria did the following. They created the following construction. Shema. Ve'viu silon shel tzonen letoch ama shel chamim. No, chaver, everybody needs to get coffee, I think. No? Matzim nishtot kafe, go get coffee. No? Ve'viu silon shel tzonen letoch ama shel chamim. You know, in Tiveria, you have chamei Tiveria. Okay. They wanted, we'll see from the Mishnah and from the Gemara, they wanted to take a bath on Shabbat. Now, whether that's mutara, so we're not going to talk about that now. It's itself a problem. But anyways, but the problem was, we're going to learn like Rashi here. Chamei Tiveria were dirty. Wow. The waters were not clean. This is how Rashi here learns. Other Tosfot and Rashi elsewhere learns differently, but this is how we're going to learn like Rashi here. So what they wanted to do, let me just explain outside, is they made a pipe that went through the Chamei Tiveria, and they had on one side a source of clean water, and they set it up before Shabbat that the clean water would go through the pipe that was surrounded by the Chamei Tiveria. It would heat up the clean water. It would come out in a pool on the opposite side, and then they had clean water that was warmed up on Shabbat. Evantem? They set it up before Shabbat. It heated it up through Chamei Tiveria. But then they had clean water, they could take a bath. That was the story. So let's see that inside again. This is what they figured it out. So like this. Maaseh she'asu anshe Tiveria. People of Tiveria set up the following. Ve'viu silon shel tzonen. They set up a pipe of a cold water, but clean water. L'toch chama shel chamin. Within the chamei Tiveria, meaning it didn't touch the water, it just went through the hot water. And it came out the other side so they could bathe. So Amru lahem Chachamim, the Chachamim said to them, Im b'Shabbat, if this happened on Shabbat, meaning the waters went through and were heated up through Shabbat, kichamin shu chamu b'Shabbat. You look at it not like waters that was heated up before Shabbat. This is water that was heated up on Shabbat. V'asurim b'chitza v'shtiyah. And it's asur both in washing and in shtiyah, and to drink. Means if you heat up water on Shabbat, you can't be nene from that. So you're not allowed to bathe in it, you're not allowed to drink it.
Wow.
Im b'yom tov. But if it was done on Yom Tov, kechamin shu chamu b'yom tov. So then it's like water heated up on Yom Tov. V'asuin b'chitza mutarin b'shtiyah. We know on Yom Tov you're allowed to do ochel nefesh. So if this pipe went through on Yom Tov, you're allowed to drink it, but you're not allowed to bathe in it. So now let's put down the final step of the Mishnah. We have the Maaseh b'Tiveria, and they used to do it, they were matir, and the Chachamim said it's asur. Okay, that's what they said.
But this is water, they really set up the whole system before Shabbat.
Before Shabbat.
And they make the first push of the water, and you know, chok hakelim mashlovim.
Yeah.
You know what is it?
Like a pump.
Chok hakelim mashlovim, that's, you know, water from up.
In balance, right.
Sucking by, so the water coming by themselves, going through, and it's still asur.
Exactly.
Wow.
Now, the Gemara is going to note two things I just want to tell you outside. Really, three ideas we're going to focus in on. We have to pay attention. There's a lot of different details. Phones away. So we said like this. Let's go through the 4 parts of our Mishnah. We have the first part of our Mishnah was an egg that was partially roasted on the kettle.
Not allowed.
So we said asur, right? We said asur. Let me put down asur. Okay, asur. The second thing, we had a machloket regarding sudarim that were heated up in the sun.
Chachamim osrim.
And then you cracked an egg on it.
Okay.
So R Yose said it's acceptable. Tanakama said asur. Then we quoted this example of burying an egg in the sand or in the dirt, which is a hatmana issue. And we said if it roasts it, so everyone agrees asur. Let me just put asur.
Rabbi Yose
doesn't argue. So first of all, we're going to have to figure out why he argues in this case by the sudarin, and he doesn't argue in the case of the sand. Additionally, when the Mishnah brings maaseh shaya, usually it has something to do with the last psak. But in this case, the Gemara is going to note this maaseh of Tiveria, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the previous psak. The previous psak, we were talking about burying an egg in sand. And then we bring a maaseh, which anshe Tiveria, that they use the water system to heat up their water. What does one have to do with the other? We'll see. Also, we have to figure out what that connection is. Says the Gemara. But it's not the same thing. Usually, maaseh, anshe Tiveria, it'll be supporting a halacha we just said. This is not the same halacha, it's 2 different halachot. Let's see the Gemara Chever. So first, Ibailu. The Gemara says like this. Following question. Gilgel mai. What is the halacha in that case you were talking about? Meaning, if somebody went ahead, he put the egg on the kettle, it partially roasted it. Is that a chiyuv d'oraita, or is that a chiyuv d'abanan? That's the question. So Rav Yosef says, Gilgel chayav chatat. If he did this, it's d'oraita. It's chayav korban chatat if it was b'shogeg. So clearly he holds it in a sur d'oraita, even the partially roasting. Now what's the logic in that? Because it makes it edible. Apparently, even partially roasting an egg, the soft boil, I guess, I don't know what the gather exactly is, but it's enough that it's edible. Memela, this would be a sur d'oraita on Shabbat.
There is no inyan of ma'achal ben rosai?
It's similar, but yeah, that's the point here. So this would be in a sur d'oraita. So he said like this, we actually brought this, we could bring a proof to this idea that even partially roasting or partially cooking, if that makes it edible, that's the Yisur D'oraita of Bishul. Because the Mishnah later on Kuf Mem Hem when Bet says the following. Turn to Lamitet Amud Aleph. Kol sheba bechamin milifnei Shabbat. Now you have like this, you have foods, Rashi learns, they used to preserve foods in melach, in salt. Right? In order to keep it that it lasts for a long time, they would keep it in salt. Now the problem is you can't really eat it while it has so much salt. So when they would want to eat it, what they would do is they would put it into hot water. And it would remove the salt content and make it edible to eat. That's what they would do. So the Mishnah there says as following. Kol sheba bechamin milifnei Shabbat. If the person put that salty fish or meat, whatever it was, in the hot water before Shabbat. So already was mitaken that. You're allowed to have it soak in that hot water on Shabbat. And the reason is because it was already mitukan before Shabbat.
It is not
So to keep
boiling.
to keep it in the hot water on Shabbat is mutar because it was already mitukan. Rashi's words are, Sharei nitkan kvar, it was already prepared before Shabbat. But if it had not been fixed up in the hot water before Shabbat, so you're not allowed to put it into the hot water on Shabbat because that's more of a cooking process. But what you are allowed to do is pour hot water over it because that's a smaller tikkun that would be allowed on Shabbat.
So you're not allowed to soak it, but you're allowed to pour
it over.
Yes.
Chutz min hamaliach yashan, besides for old salted fish, ve'kulias ha'ispanin. Kulias ha'ispanin, Rashi, I saw the art scroll learns, is Spanish mackerel. Now these are two types of fish that the preparation for them, they're very tender, they're very, I guess, soft fish, but the point is that the preparation for them is much more minimal. It requires much less. So for those, Shehadachatan zuhi gmar melachtan, that even pouring boiling water over them is gmar melachtan.
So it's a big tikkun?
That makes it completely usable already. Gmar melachtan, it's the completion of the process, and that would be asur on Shabbat. So what does it mean? Shma mina, says the Gemara, what's the proof? The proof is that even that partial preparation, if it makes it edible, that's going to be a prohibited bishul on Shabbat. So that's the proof. The same thing with the eggs. If it cooks it partially, and that makes it able to be eaten, that's also going to be an Isser D'Oraita. That's what Rashi points out. Since it calls it Gemar Melachto, even though it's only a little bit, you see that's considered bishul. If it makes it edible, that's already going to be chayav on the D'Oraita level. Shma mina, that's a proof.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
You say that if it's metaken, if it's a minimal tikkun, allowed.
And it makes it edible.
It's a big tikkun asur.
Exactly.
Just because it's just require minimal.
As long as it makes it edible, it's asur to do that on Shabbat because that's already bishul. So the same thing with the egg.
מה זה נולד?
No, bishul. It's bishul.
מה בישול פה? If it's like already kavush.
The point is, but now you're using the hot water in this case to make that food edible. That's bishul. That's the problem. Yeah.
Just because it's the hot water?
Exactly. Using heat in order to improve the food on Shabbat.
But if I would use cold water, there's no problem.
If you would use, you can't. It doesn't do anything for you. Cold water, you need hot water for this, right? Okay, let's move on.
הבאנו את כל זה, אם גם understand, שההדחה זה גמר מלאכתן, ואפילו small process like that is considered like a
If it makes it edible, that's bishul. So the same thing here.
So we try to compare to the egg, even tzliya kala, to make it
edible,
it's already
bishul
already.
That's exactly. That's the proof. Exactly. Let's continue. We said the second part of our Mishnah. We said a machloket. Are you allowed to focus in good? Focus in good, Chevra. You put these scarves or these materials in the sun. Tanakama said you're not allowed to crack an egg and cook it like that. R Yose said it's mutar. Okay? Says the Gemara. Let's see. Says the Gemara, wait a second. But wait a second. There's a Mishnah later on Kuf Mem Vav Amud Bet. And what does it say over there? It says like this. Notnin tavshil, the first two cases are not nogeatas. It says like this. Notnin tavshil etoch habor b'shvil sheyehe shamu. It's allowed to put a cooked food inside of a pit in order that it's guarded. Now, the pit, I'm not going to get into this because we'll discuss this then, God willing, but the point is, inside of the pit, it's dry and it's cool. So if you want to put some sort of a cooked food inside of there, that would be allowed on Shabbat. We'll discuss it then. Also, you could put clean water inside of dirty water, means in some sort of a kli, obviously, in order that it cools it down. We'll discuss those then. We're just not going to get to here. Ve'etat sonen bechama, says the Mishnah, you're allowed to put cold water, sonen bechama, in the sun, bishvil shechamu, in order to heat it up. So says the Gemara, you're allowed to. Lema Rab Yose, it sounds like that's like the position of Rab Yose. You can use the heat of the sun to heat something up. Velo Rabbanan, it's not like the Rabbanan. Because the Rabbanan here say it's asur to crack the egg over those hot scarves. Seemingly, you're not allowed to use the heat of the sun. Rabbi Yose says it's mutar, so that Mishnah would appear to be like Rabbi Yose, not the Rabbanan. And what's the difference? Ma'achiluk. You hear? Put a pot of water in the sun and it heats it up. The Mishnah says it's mutar. But the Rabbanan say you're not allowed to crack an egg over a hot scarf. So what would be the difference? Why would the Rabbanan agree over there and be cholek over here?
But water, we said that they are steaming out, mitztamek veralo.
No, it's not cooked.
The
Say
water?
cold water, cold water. Bishvil sheyeh chamu. It's not heated up yet.
But what kind of a kli I have that really boiling up?
You put it in the sun. It's 100 degrees outside in Miami. You put water outside, it'll get a little warmer, hotter, I don't know. You know, it'll heat up. Figure it out.
נו, כמה זה נהיה העברה?
אבל זה משהו אחר, כי פה המאכל כבר היה ראוי לאכילה. לפני ששמתי אותו בשמש. פה הביצה לא הייתה ראויה לאכילה. עשיתי שינוי.
That's for sure bishul. To cook water is considered bishul.
No, I'm talking about here.
You really cooking the water?
בשביל את המים היפים, ואת הצונן, מים או מאכל שהם צוננים בחמה, בשביל שיחמו, רק לחמם אותם, לא לבשל אותם.
It needs to heat it up though. Yeah.
חימום זה נחשב בישול.
Yeah, we're looking at the same. Right. So listen to this. The Gemara is going to say a big yesod over
water,
here. Very important yesod. No, meaning it wasn't cooked up. It was cool before.
רגע, זאת פעם, מה השאלה? למה פה...
Why the Rabbanan are cholek in the case of the sudarim, but they're not cholek in the case of the hot water in the sun? So Amar Nachman, he says like this. Very important. Let's get the gedarim here. We have chama, or, and then toldot chama and toldot or. Okay? So Nachman says like this. B'chama, when it comes to using the sun directly, you're not using toldot chama. You're using the sun's heat directly. Dekule yama lo pligi deshari. Everyone agrees it's mutar. Why is it mutar? Why?
You don't do any pa'ula.
Why is it mutar? More than that. Because what's the ikar av melacha from Mishkan? What did they do in the Mishkan for Bishul? Esh. Oh. So memela, the chama itself, using the heat of the sun, that's not asur directly in any way. No one agrees. No one holds that's asur. That's not the av melacha.
Okay.
B'toldot ha'or. Now this is important too. Esh directly, of course, we know is asur. But even toldot ha'or, which is the byproduct of fire, meaning if something was heated up in the fire, to use that item, kulei amelo pligida asur. Everybody holds that's going to be asur doraita. Okay, included in esh is toldot esh as well. So therefore, one sec, that's what we're talking about yet. Means if something was heated up in the fire directly, that would be asur deoraita to use also. Even though it's not or, it's toldot or, that's also asur. Rega, patience. Ki pligi, when is there a machloket? B'toldot hachama. It's when something was heated up by the sun, which is toldot hachama, which is the case of sudarim, of the case of this case. That's a machloket. So listen, let's get it clear. Chama directly, kulei amamodi mutar. Esh or toldot esh, vaday shasur deoraita. Machloket is there a suda rabbanan gzera in the case of toldot achama?
Okay, but what is toldot achama?
Sudar.
With
this case. This case, you put the sudar in the sun.
Sudar is a mukum achat.
Yeah. And then you wanted to put eggs on it. So now it's not directly from the sun, but it's the byproduct of the sun. This is a machloket.
So the pot is basically the pan, whatever that they put. Is toldot chama?
Exactly. Let's see that inside.
החום שיש בו תולדות
כי פליגי בתולדות החמה, says the Gemara, Mar Savar, let's see it inside. Mar Savar, look inside. Mar Savar, Rabbanan hold, Gazrinan toldot החמה, etu toldot ha'or. We make a gzera. Since toldot ha'or is asur, we're going to extend it also to toldot החמה. Because if we allow you to use toldot chama, you might end up using toldot ha'or. So therefore they extended the gzeira from toldot ha'or to toldot ha'chama. Mar Savar Rabbi Yose holds lo gazrinan. We don't make that gzeira. Meaning people understand there's a difference between them. That if you put out handkerchiefs outside to heat up, they know that's not like using something that was heated on the fire. Memela, that's not a problem. Okay?
So if I put
so it comes out, that's the machloket, just to be clear.
If I put cup of water, the cup itself It's not a kli?
The water in the sun.
It's not toldot chama?
Oh, so if it's in the sun, everybody agrees it's mutar.
The water needs to be in a kli.
The question is, if you take that kli that was heated up by the sun, and then you put something in it after, this is going to be a machloket. Very interesting.
If I take cup with water, it's outside. The cup itself is not a kli that's causing toldot chama.
That would be toldot chama because the sun's shining on it. But if you take the item that was previously heated in the sun, and you put food in it, bring it inside, it's still very hot.
But they say it needs to be in some kli.
You take that kli that was heated in the sun, and you put food inside of it after. That's toldot chama. In such a case, we have machloket, Rabbi Yose and the Tanakama and Rabbanan. Rabbanan say we make a gzeira just like toldot o is asur. Also, toldot chama is going to be.
But if I pour the egg right now to a
Yeah.
pot and I put it now in the sun, this is toldot chama.
Again?
I took it before.
No, that's chama. That's chama. You put it in the sun. That's chama. We're talking about where you took something that was heated in the sun and you put food inside of it. That's going to be toldot chama, and that's a machlok.
התולדה זה הסעודה, מה שנולד.
Exactly.
אז אפשר להכין חביתה בשבת?
לא.
מה?
תולדת החמה לא.
זה לא תולדת חמה.
מחלוקת,
זה
זה
ישף.
מחלוקת. רבנן
זה
says
ישף עם משהו.
Rabbi Yose says mutar. Okay, Chevra, we have to go a little bit weiter. I want to cover a little more ground today. Now, the Mishnah told us in the third part of the Mishnah. Everybody clear though? Everybody clear about the machloket? What are you not clear?
What's the toldot chama? I'm just losing it because tolada is the kli itself.
The kli itself that was heated in the sun is toldot chama. That means if you take that kli, you bring it inside, and you put eggs inside.
But if I took the kli with the item that I want,
if you leave it outside, that's chama. If you leave it outside, that's chama. It's hitting the sun's hitting it.
It's eating the kli and the item inside.
Yeah, exactly.
אין בעיה?
That would be chama. That would be mutar. Exactly. That's everyone agrees mutar.
מותר לכם מה
Exactly. Yeah, I mean,
Shabbat.
Yeah, has to be pretty hot, by the way. I don't know if it's so simple, if it's not so hot. Eggs cook very quickly, so it could be that's why. That's we're discussing eggs. Yeah, what?
Last week, for example, the heat wave.
It could be. Eggs cook quickly. It could be that. Anyways, let's continue. Now we said in the Mishnah, the third part of the Mishnah, you're not allowed to bury an egg in the sand or in the dirt in order that it should roast. Now everybody agreed about this. Rabbi Yose did not disagree. So we're going to have two shitot. Why is it Rabbi Yose argues in this case of sudarin, but he doesn't argue in this case of afar? What's the difference between them? Right? What's the chiluk? Why is this more machmir? Why is this worse? So the Gemara says, "V'lo yatminana bechol v'lif lugnami Rabbi Yose baha." Asks the Gemara, why doesn't Rabbi Yose also argue in this case? He should say, just like in the case the sudarin, you say it's mutar because it's toldot chama. And toldot chama, you hold is mutar. In this case also, it's toldot chama, so it should be mutar. What's the difference? So we have two answers. Listen good to these two answers. Rabba and Rav Yosef. Rabba is the first answer. He says like this. Rav Yose is more machmir because he says like this. Gezerah shema yatmin beremetz. In this case, let's be clear. This is a classic case of toldot chama. The item was heated by the sun. Crack an egg on it. Gezerah, you might end up using toldot o. Fine.
Okay.
Here, what did you do? You put the egg inside of dirt. The problem is, if you're allowed to do that, Rabbi Yose says, you might end up putting it also inside of hot ashes. Remetz is the hot ashes. What's the problem of hot ashes? In our case, what did we just finish saying? Not only is esh a problem, but even toldot esh. Remetz is toldot esh. It was something heated up on the oven itself. So if we allow you to put the egg inside of afar that was heated up, even though it's by the sun, you might end up putting it inside of the hot ashes itself, which is toldot ha'esh, which is a sodoraita. So therefore, Rabbi Yose says, even though I don't say toldot ha'chama is a problem, this is a gzeira because you might end up putting it inside, says Rabba, of toldot ha'remetz, of toldot ha'esh, which is remetz. That's Rabba.
Much more severe.
Which is more severe, exactly. That's Rabba's pshat. So Rabba says the reason Rabbi Yose doesn't argue that he agrees in this case is because it's a gzeira. You might put it in remetz, which would be a sodoraita. Answer one. Rav Yosef says different pshat. He says mipnei shemeziz afar mimkomo. Now listen, there's two ways to learn this in the Rishonim. I'll tell you Rashi and Tosfot. Rav Yosef says when you put the egg inside of the dirt, you might you were going to meziz afar mimkomo, move the dirt from its place. What does it mean? It means you're taking this egg. Now the dirt is stuck together. So you want to move it around so the egg fits inside and heats up. Now Tosfot learns it's a muktzeh problem. One second. Tosfot learns you have an egg and there's dirt outside.
You dig.
You want to hold on. You have an egg and there's dirt outside. You want to put the egg in the dirt.
Okay.
So meziz afal mimkomo. So what's the problem? So Tosfot says the problem is muktzeh. That dirt is muktzeh. So therefore, when you're pushing it in, you're touching the dirt. That's going to be a problem of muktzeh. So therefore, that's going to be asur in this case, not in the case of sudarim, because sudarim are not muktzeh, not a problem. Rashi learns differently. Bear with me, but get it. Rashi learns it's an issue of chafira. You're going to dig a hole. Shem yaseh chafira. You might dig a hole. It's hard. You're going to dig a hole, and that's a different issur.
So you might miss some sand. You make a dig from somewhere else to come.
Tosfot doesn't like this pshat in Rashi, but let's just keep in mind the two pshatim. Rav Yosef says Shem yaziz afal mimkomo. Either it's muktzeh problem or it's a digging problem. Okay, so now what we have over here is two reasons why Rav Yosef is machmir in the case of the hatmana bechol, and he's mekil in the case of sudarin. The first pshat is Rabba. Rabba says what? Is that generally toldot chama, he doesn't hold as a problem. The problem here is you might put it into remetz, which is an isur d'oraita. That's Rabba. Rav Yosef says you might end up touching the sand, which is muktzeh, or you might end up digging a hole, which is chafira. Okay, that's the twist. So says the Gemara. My benayu, what is the nafkamina between Rabba and Rav Yosef? So the answer is Ika benayu afal tichuach. Rashi learned. I'm going to add what Rashi says over here. If there's dirt that's very soft dirt, so it's very pliable, it moves very easily, and it's deep, Rashi says. So in such a case, listen to how the Rishonim explain, you're not going to have to push it in. It falls in by itself. Soft dirt. You're not going to push it into the soil. It falls in by itself. So says Tosfot, since it moves by itself, you're not going to touch the dirt. It's not a muktzeh problem. It goes in by it's like quicksand. It's very soft. Soft dirt.
Like a glade.
I don't know what
that
means.
Soaks it in.
Soft dirt, it's very soft.
It's
so soft that when you put it up, it'll just fall in by itself. Memela, says Tosfot, it's not a muktzeh problem according to Rav Yosef. It's not a problem of chafira either because it goes by itself. But according to Rabba, that you put it in remetz, it is a problem. So it comes out like this. This is the nafkamina. According to Rabba, where it goes in by itself, there's still a problem of zera shemayasenu beremetz. You might put it into the remetz, now be isur of toldot ta'or. But according to Rav Yosef, it's a muktzeh or whether it's chafira, it's not a problem because it goes in by itself. That's the nafkamina between Rabba and Rav Yosef. But bekitzer, what comes out is we have two ways of understanding why Rav Yossi is more machmir in this case, the third part of our Mishnah, than the second. Either, as Rabba explains, here when you put it in the dirt, you might end up putting it in the ashes, which would be toldot ta'or, as opposed to in the sudarin, you don't have that problem. Which Rashi says because you don't usually heat up sudarin on the fire. It doesn't make sense. Tosfot says, sorry. Or the problem, like Rav Yosef says, is you're going to end up touching the dirt, which is either muktzeh or chafira. That would be the issue when it comes to atmana bechol. That's not an issue with sudarim. Two ways to understand. I have two questions on Rav Yosef.
What's the nafkamina with the afar tichuach? It's allowed?
That according to Rav Yosef, there's no problem because it goes in by itself. So it's not a muktzeh problem, it's not a chafira problem. But it is a gzera still of Shem yasenu beremetz, so according to Rav, it is a problem.
Like you end up doing it in the afar tichuach, you're going to do it in remetz.
Exactly. Yala. Now, two questions on Rav Yosef's pshat. Let's see. Meiteve. Question number one. Meiteve. We have a braita that says like this. Now we're about to quote Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, what is it? Ma baya? Ma problem? Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says in the braita, he follows the position of Rav Yossi. So what does he say? He says like this. Megalgilin beitzal gabe gag roteach. You're allowed to partially roast. Lashon gilgel, like we learned before. You're allowed to partially roast an egg on top of a roof that is roteach. Now at this point we're saying is the top of the roof gets hot and there's some dirt on top of the roof. So Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is saying, seemingly like Rav Yossi, you're allowed to roast an egg on the roof where there's a little bit of dirt on Shabbat. But you're not allowed to roast it on sid. Sid is lime. It's a type of stone, really. On sidrotech. Now this is toldot ha'esh. That's something heated up in the oven. That's not really the focal point here, though. That's heated up in the oven, so therefore that's toldot ha'esh.
But let's say you have a marble.
That's
the marble is boiling.
Now, from the fire will be aso. But the point is the beginning of his statement. Shifman Gamliel says, "Migalgelin beitza al gabe gagotech." The way we understand it is there's some dirt on the roof, and you're allowed to roast the egg on that. And he's going in Rabbi Yossi's shita. So the Gemara says like this: Bishlam alamanda amar. According to Rabbah, who says Gzeira shema yatmin beremetz. The whole problem of putting it in dirt. What's the issue? Is you might end up putting it in remetz. So I understand lekel migzav. What's the point here? It's not completely surrounded by the dirt, so it's not domet to the case of remetz. So there's a little bit of dirt around it. Nishkeferach. That's not a problem. I understand why Rashbag says that's mutar. I understand, because it's not enveloped. In order to be included in the Gezerah, it has to be surrounded by it. But according to Rav Yosef, what's the problem? The problem according to Rav Yosef is you might end up touching muktzeh or digging a hole. So you should make a Gezerah, because that dirt on the roof, even if it's a little, it's still muktzeh, or you could make a hole in it still. Why would Rav Shimon Gamliel say it's mutar if he holds like Rav Yossi? So the Gemara answers, not a kasha. Stam gag let be'afar. No, the roof doesn't have dirt. Memela, there's no problem. You're going to touch the dirt. There's no dirt on the roof. The hava amina was there's some dirt on the roof. Teretz says there's no dirt, not a problem. That's why it wouldn't be an issue. Okay, now we get back to the Mishnah. Now look, Chevra. In the Mishnah, at the end of the Mishnah, we said the story with Anshe Tveria. Remember the story?
Sure.
What was the story?
With the pipe that's holding cold water and actually getting warm, heat by the hot water from the Tveria, and then it's actually direct the water into a clean pool,
and then
so
they can
actually have hot water.
So the Chachamim said it's asu.
It's like you're putting
Chachamim said it's asu.
A cup, closed cup inside of the mecham, and the cup is going to get hot from the water.
Now look,
the toldot ha'esh.
Let's think for a second. Let's use our brains for a second. Chachamim said that. Focus.
toldot chama.
Maaser Tveria, that story in Tveria. We said, what does it have to do with the previous case?
toldot chama.
Now look, the Gemara is going to bring this as a proof against Rav Yosef. So let's see how Rav Yosef understands this. Let's see. That's going to be the kasha. 1 second.
Rav Yosef?
Sticha, 1 second. Yeah, exactly. That's going to be the kasha, right? According to Rabbah, why does Rav Yossi agree that this is asur? Means what's the problem in this case? According to Rabbah, what's the problem, be'etzem? Rabbah, the first answer. Remetz. Now, the whole problem of remetz is if you put it in dirt that completely surrounds it, you might end up putting it in toldot ha'esh, which is remetz.
Okay.
So the Gemara is going to say like this. I understand, Rabbah, this makes a lot of sense. Because just like in this case, the problem is it's completely surrounded by the dirt, and there's a gezerah, you might put it in remetz. In this case too, you put a pipe of water, of cold water, through, completely surrounded by hot water, and it heated it up, and the Chachamim said it's asur. So the story is a similar scenario, and I understand why it's brought to show when it's enveloped, there's a gezerah, you might put it in remetz after the fact. So I understand the sipur as it relates to the way Rabbah learns pshat in this isur. But the way,
I'm just trying to listen,
yeah.
Okay.
But the way that Rav Yosef explains it, the issue is you might touch the dirt. What does touching the dirt have to do with the story of Chamei Tveria? There's no kesher between this story and that psak.
Maybe you're going to be metaken the pipe.
According to Rabbah, the issue is it's surrounded by something. Okay, so it's similar.
But
is
the
water is surrounded by hot water. The sipur makes sense in the flow according to Rabbah. But according to Rav Yosef, here you're talking about touching dirt, and there you're talking about Chamei Tveria, which is a problem according to the Chachamim. What does one have to do with the other? Let's read it inside. Says the Gemara.
There is also atmana here. There is also atmana, mosif chom.
No, but that's not the problem. The problem is you might touch the dirt, according to Rav Yosef.
You might
touch the dirt. It's a different issue. Or make a muktzeh or chafira, but it's not an issue.
But it's specific לרמץ
or whatever. So that's the kasha. What does the story have to do with that? Usually the story brought us to support that previous halacha. Tashma, let's bring a kasha Rav Yosef from our Mishnah. It said in our Mishnah, Ma'aseh shasu anshe Tveria ve'viu silon shel. They put the pipe of cold water l'toch chama shel chamin within the hot springs of Tveria, and the Chachamim said it's asur. I understand according to Rabba the issue is you might do atmana beremetz, so it's surrounded by dirt, or it'll become surrounded by the remetz. So hainu dedamya atmana. It's similar to atmana. It's an issue of atmana. You might end up. Why? Because the cold water is surrounded by hot water. It's a similar halacha. But according to Rav Yosef, the issue in this case is you'll move the dirt, either muktzeh or chafira. What does this fourth part of the Mishnah, the Sipor, have to do with the psak about the chol or about the afal? So says Rav Yosef, no, you don't understand. This story is not connected to the third part of the Mishnah. Actually, it refers back to the machloket. Even though it's written out of order, which is very interesting. I don't know why the Mishnah does this. Rav Yosef says this story connects to the machloket, not to the case of chol ve'afar. Enachinami. The case of chol ve'afar, the atmana there is you might touch the dirt. It's not really an atmana issue. Touching the dirt, Rav Yosef says. But this is exactly. This is where the story was brought for. Let's see. Says Rav Yosef, Mi savrit maaset Tveria seifakai. He thought it was going on the end, the third case of the Mishnah. Areishakai. It was going on the second part of the Mishnah, which was Lo yafkian b'sudarin Rav Yosef matir. So what was the machloket? We explained the machloket is toldot, chama asur or mutar. Tanakama says asur, Rav Yossi says mutar. Va'achi ka'amri leRabbanan Rav Yossi. And the Rabbanan are bringing this story as a proof against Rav Yossi. Why? Because this is a story of toldot chama, and the rabbi said it's asur. That's what it's being brought in the Mishnah for. So this is actually a proof against Rav Yossi. Because now, why is that called toldot chama?
Because the water is becoming clean. That's warming up.
This is a little bit of a chidush to me.
Again.
The Rabbanan are saying, you see this story, the Rabbanan said it's asur, and that's a story of toldot chama. So you see, toldot chama, in the case of sudarin, should also be asur. But why is this maaseh of Tveria considered toldot chama? How are the waters of a hot spring heated up?
From the bottom.
From the sun.
From the bottom.
I would say like Yochai. I don't know kamo Yochai. What does that have to do with the sun? Why is it toldot chama?
Aren't you go to the ocean sometimes in the summer and it's very hot?
That's not chamei Tveria. Chamei Tveria is different. I would assume. So I saw the Rishonim explain the way this is understood is the sun shines under the ground, causing heat, which heats up the hot springs. I don't understand the Metziut exactly, but that's how they explain it. Kind of. Oh, not exactly. Evantem, the sun shines underneath, creating heat, so that's considered toldot chama. So says Rav Yosef, that's a proof to me. Rav Yosef says the Chachamim will say, you see, the Sidarin case would also be asur because toldot chama is asur from the case of Anshe Tveria. How does Rav Yosef?
I saw that it's getting hot from the Gehenom.
So how does Rabbi Yossi respond to this? Rabbi Yossi, it's a good kasha. How can you say that toldot chama is mutar? It's a good proof. So says Rabbi Yossi, Amar lahu, Rabbi Yossi said back to the Chachamim, meaning this is how he would answer. Ahu toldot orhu. Actually, chamei Tveria is toldot or. That's why it's asur. How's it toldot or? Dechalfi apitcha de Gehenom. Because the springs of Tveria pass by the entrance of Gehenom. Gehenom is fire. Understand? And this is a little bit hard to understand because I don't know if it's a mitzvah, a physical fire. But the way Rabbi Yossi says is actually that's toldot or. That's why the Chachamim said it's asur there. But that's not a proof to this case, which is toldot chama. That might be mutar. That's how Rabbi Yossi would respond. Right, let's just finish up a couple lines because we finish up the psak. So the Gemara says like this: Amar Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says, turn to Lametet Amud Bet. Mima'aseh she'asu Anshe Tveria. The fact that Anshe Tveria they built this system. The Rabbanan said it's asur. So from this we know batlat mana bedavar mosif hevel that it's asur. Means they nullified the allowance. It's asur to do atmana with something that's mosif hevel. Ve'afilu mi be'od yom. Even if you set it up while it's still day. Means we know from this story, the fact the rabbi said it's asur, even if you set it up while it's still day, if it's mosif hevel, it's asur. Now, Tosfot says, I don't know why we need to bring a raya from the story. We're going to have a Mishnah later on Mem Zayin that says this clearly. And we learned this before, by the way. If it's davar shemosif hevel, afilu mi be'od yom, it's asur. So why are you bringing a proof from the story? So Tosfot and other Rishonim here explain, it means not only is it asur to do this, but if you do it, the item is going to be asur ba'achila, after the fact. That's the chidush here. Okay, but we'll speak more about that later. But the point is that it's asur because you see the Chachamim made it asur. Amar Ula, Ula said no. Halacha k'anshei Tveria, actually, the halacha is like anshei Tveria, you are allowed to set up this system. Amar Rav Nachman said it's not true because kfar tavrinu anshei Tveria lesilunayu. The people of Tveria broke their pipes, meaning the people of Tveria, after the Chachamim said it's asur, they broke their pipes, means they themselves retracted their psak. They thought it was mutar. Chachamim said it's asur, so therefore you can't bring a proof from what they did because they themselves were chozer. They said if you're not allowed to, it's a mosif hevel, you're not allowed to do this type of atmana, and therefore it's actually asur on Shabbat. Okay, we'll stop here at the two dots. Zat Hashem, we'll pick up next week from Maaseh Shasu and Sheit Feria.